You know, when we think about money, our minds immediately go to spreadsheets, charts, and, cold hard logic. But what if I told you the biggest factor in building wealth isn't your IQ, it's your psychology? We're about to explore how our own minds are often our worst enemies in what is a deeply psychological game.
I mean, it's the million-dollar question, isn't it? You can be an absolute genius, a doctor, a lawyer. You can read every finance book out there and still find yourself making the same dumb mistakes with money. That's because being smart doesn't make you immune to bias. In fact, it often just helps you build a more convincing story for why your bad decision is actually a rational one, right before it all blows up. So what are we really talking about here? We're talking about the invisible forces. It's all about those gut feelings, those hidden assumptions, and the emotional triggers that are quietly pulling the strings on your financial life. So this isn't really a finance lesson, it's more like a diagnosis of the mental traps that are silently wrecking your future. Alright, so here's how we're going to break this all down. We're going to start with how our own minds distort reality. Then, we'll get into the whole social pressure of the ego. After that, we'll talk about how to actually plan for our own irrationality. And finally, we'll land on what wealth truly means.
Okay, let's dive right into our first section. Seeing isn't believing. This is all about the internal wiring, the mental shortcuts that warp our perception of money. And it all starts with the biggest illusion of them all, the idea that we're logical.
So this right here, this is our first major mental trap. We think we're making logical choices, but our entire financial worldview is built on this tiny, tiny sliver of our own personal experience. Think about it. Someone who grew up poor might see all debt as evil. Someone who got rich quick on a meme stock thinks the stock market is a casino. To them, their choices seem perfectly rational, but they're basing 100% of their decisions on like 0.0001% of what's actually happened in the world. And that leads to our second trap. We think we're in control way more than we actually are. Luck and risk are these two invisible giants that shape everything. Take Bill Gates. Yeah, he was brilliant, but he also had a 1 in a million stroke of luck getting access to a school computer in the 70s. His friend, Kent Evans, was just as brilliant, but he suffered a 1 in a million stroke of risk and died before he could even graduate. Same talent, completely different outcomes.
Oh, and we just love a good story, don't we? We'll pick a compelling story over hard data almost every single time. I mean, look at any speculative bubble. People weren't buying the math, they were buying the dream, the story of getting rich overnight. The story feels good, so we want it to be true, and we ignore all the flashing red lights.
So, if our internal view of the world is already warped, what happens when we start worrying about what other people think? Well, that brings us to Section 2, the ego's expensive game. This is all about how our deep-seated need for social approval leads to some truly awful money choices. The first trap here is a big one. We confuse being wealthy with looking rich. Looking rich is easy to see. It's the fancy car, the designer clothes, the big house. But real wealth, it's invisible. It's the money you haven't spent. It's the stocks, bonds, and assets that are quietly growing, giving you freedom. Spending money just to show people how much money you have is literally the fastest way to have less money. This quote just nails it, and it perfectly sets up one of the most powerful psychological blunders we all make, something called the man in the car paradox. We think that if we buy impressive things, other people will admire us, but that's not really how it works. Okay, so here's the paradox in action. When you drive down the street in a flashy sports car, you imagine everyone is thinking, wow, look at them, they're so successful and cool. But they're not. What they're actually thinking is, wow, if I had that car, people would think I'm cool. See the difference? And that's the punchline. They're not admiring you. They're using your stuff as a prop to imagine their own lives. Chasing respect and admiration with material things is just a losing game, because the people you're trying to impress are way too busy thinking about themselves. And this, of course, throws us right onto the soul-crushing hamster wheel of never enough. Social comparison is a game you can't win because the finish line keeps moving. You get a promotion, but your neighbor gets a bigger one. You buy a nice house, but your friend on Instagram buys a mansion. The only way to win is to just stop playing. All right, so for our third section, let's talk about solutions. We're calling this Planning for Human Nature, and it's all about bridging that massive gap between our perfect, logical spreadsheets and our messy, emotional, real-world selves. So you look at data like this, and it seems so simple. Over the long haul, the market goes up. A 20-year period has a 100% chance of a positive return. Great. But here's the thing. That data is totally useless if you can't stomach the short-term chaos and you panic sell at the first sign of trouble. Your spreadsheet doesn't feel fear, but you absolutely do.
This is such a game-changing mindset shift. When the market is crashing and you feel that gut-wrenching panic, that's not a fine for doing something wrong. It's the fee. It's the price of admission to the theme park of long-term returns. If you're not willing to pay the price of entry, you don't get to go on the rides.
And this reveals this amazing contradiction. Getting rich and staying rich are polar opposite skills. Getting rich is all about offense. You need optimism, you need to take risks. But staying rich, that's all defense. It requires humility and a healthy dose of paranoia that you could lose it all tomorrow. Survival is so much more important than big returns.
So how do you play defense? How do you survive? You build a margin of safety. You have to plan on your plan not going according to plan, because it won't. Life is messy. There will be surprises. Having that buffer, whether it's extra cash or multiple income streams or just realistic expectations, is what lets you stay in the game when things inevitably go wrong.
All right, so once you've built a plan that can actually survive reality, it kind of forces you to ask, what's the point of all this? What are we really chasing? And that brings us to our final section, where we're going to redefine wealth itself, not as a number, but as something much more valuable. We all know this guy, Warren Buffett. The name is basically synonymous with investing genius. And you see this absolutely insane number, $160 billion, and you just assume he got there by hitting home run after home run, year after year. But that's not the real story. Not even close.
Look at this. This is the big reveal. Over 95% of Warren Buffett's entire net worth was earned after he was eligible for Social Security. His real secret wasn't being the world's greatest investor, it was being a pretty good investor for an unbelievably long period of time.
And this timeline just drives the point home. The real superpower in finance isn't a huge brain, it's time, it's compounding. If Buffett had started investing at 30 and retired at 60, like a normal person, you would have never, ever heard of him. His skill was just staying in the game long enough for compounding to work its magic.
And that, right there, brings us to the whole point. The ultimate goal isn't $1 billion. It's not the yacht. The highest dividend that money pays is control over your time. The simple, priceless ability to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, for as long as you want. That is true wealth.
So we've walked through all these psychological traps, from our own flawed perceptions to the insane pressure to keep up with everyone else. I guess the only question left to ask is this: now that you can see them, which one of these traps are you in right now?